We can say ignorance is the very root of all conditioned things, sakra, whatsoever. In this way, we can see that, in the first place, it is ignorance which accounts for feeling. The next point to be considered more closely is, it is because there is ignorance that one is deluded as to the value and meaning of feeling, Vedana, and tends to become attached to it, a mere illusion, and grasps it as reality. This is what is meant by the statement that with the arising of ignorance, there is the arising of feeling. The statement that feeling arises from craving, ta, refers to the mode of conditioning, which is closely connected with the preliminary measure. That is, when one desires to experience any kind of feeling, one searches or acts, and the desired feeling is induced. As a general rule, it is said conditioned by feeling is craving. This means once the feeling has arisen, there arise various kinds of desires with regard to it. For example, one has a desire to indulge and maintain that feeling passionately, which, in its turn, has the power to give rise to clinging, upadana. But here we are thinking on different lines, just the opposite, that is, feeling is conditioned by craving. One should understand this point clearly, otherwise one may regard it as a contradiction. As for the point that feeling, whether desirable or undesirable, is induced by kama, action, this means that fruition, vipaka, of past kama plays its part in bringing about feeling. Finally, the fact that feeling arises from sense impression, phassa, points to a mental law, which operates under one's nose and is the most immediate cause of the arising of feeling. Most of us know that sense impression or contact, which is the coming together of the three things, namely, sense organ, sense object and consciousness, does result in giving rise to feeling. If we consider the four causes of feeling altogether and their interrelationship, we can see clearly that feeling results from their joint function, with ignorance as a general basis, craving as motive force giving direction, kama, in its turn, coming in between as supporter, and then sense impression as the immediate condition. When the meditator clearly sees, then of course, feeling arises manifestly, that is, to him while breathing in and out. Feelings are clearly known as they arise. B. The meditator regards the temporary appearance or manifestation, upana, of feelings as impermanent, unsatisfactory, and no self. This contemplation should be developed until it bears fruit, that is, until the meditator knows clearly and directly through the contemplation of impermanence, the manifestation of dissolution, through the contemplation of unsatisfactoriness, the manifestator of fear, and through the contemplation of no self, the manifestation of voidness. These three things, namely, dissolution, fear and voidness, cannot in the least be manifest in the mind of a person who tries to understand impermanence, etc., through the study of scriptures. They are experienced within the mind directly, and are not just dry facts obtained from books. These experiences cannot be manifest to the person who thinks in a rationalistic manner on the level of philosophy or logic, simply because they are beyond the scope of reasoning. The range of reasoning just cannot reach them. If a person is convinced of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and no self, merely through his reasoning, that is not enough. We cannot say that the appearance or manifestation, upana, of feeling is clear to him. In this way, we can see that these three things can be manifest only when a person continues contemplating feelings in the right way, and thereby gains penetration into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and no self, and this penetration is based on the seeing of arising, momentary manifestation and cessation of feeling.
The statement that the meditator clearly knows the manifestation of dissolution signifies that the meditator is seriously moved, savega, to see within himself that all phenomena are dissolving, are ever-changing and flowing on indifferently and implacably. This is not a knowledge of dissolution gained through the intellect or reasoning. It is knowledge gained through realization or actual experience of the taste and perplexity of various things, especially feeling. As for fear, it is to be understood in the same way as dissolution above, but here, in the case of fear, it is easier to see that fear as an actual feeling cannot possibly be brought about by intellectual knowledge or reasoning. It arises out of direct experience with things concerned and not otherwise. Everybody knows that a tiger is a fearful animal, and every one can have reason to believe that a tiger is a terrifying beast, yet one does not really have fear until one comes face to face with such an animal in an isolated place. This is an illustration to show that fear of unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, cannot possibly arise through study or philosophical reasoning. It must arise through practicing Dhamma, directly experiencing things with their property of unsatisfactoriness. To sum up, let a person through applying the techniques of practice gradually look and see and realize the nature of things as they really are. And then he will know for himself authoritatively and unmistakably that while contemplating feeling as unsatisfactory, the fear in appearance or manifestation is seen face to face. As for the expression manifestation of voidness, which is seen through the contemplation of no self, it implies that the meditator sees different phenomena as void or empty of all attributes which have their origin either in convention or conception. All conventionalism, samadhi, and conceptualization result from feeling which is dominated by ignorance, craving, etc.
This kind of feeling which is overpowered by craving, etc. cannot in any way lead one to have a feeling of voidness. Therefore this kind of feeling merely tends to be a way of thinking in the opposite to voidness. Thinking in terms of a self-abiding entity or entities in one form or the other on this and that level, all of which has to do with false notions of attributes and supposed substantiality in one way or the other. People therefore think that different things are not devoid of essence. On the contrary, they hold that all phenomena are substantial, solid, something in themselves, valid, having value or worth, more or less as they happen to think of them in their ignorance. Normally people are completely blinded with ignorance and so naturally fail to have a glimpse of voidness, but whatever they feel in their blindness they lay hold of as something, as substance. They do not feel they have misconceived it, they feel certain that it is real, that it is reality. For this reason, the entire knowledge derived from the power of reasoning of a common worldling cannot lead him to voidness, but, on the contrary, leads him astray. We have, therefore, to find out a method to gain power and strength sufficient to counter the current of attachment of the common worldling and thereby penetrate through each and everything as being void of self or individuality. Here it should be understood that voidness does not mean nihilism or non-existence of material or mental phenomena, it simply signifies that all material and mental phenomena are void of self or soul, and that there is no such thing as subjectivity or objectivity applicable to them or any abiding entity somewhere between or beyond those phenomena. There are material and mental phenomena in a state of flux without soul in reality. Except soul or souls, which are such stuff as dreams are made of resulting from misconceptions based on ignorance, etc.
Completely covering the voidness of self whenever one is awakened to the elusiveness of self by means of practicing properly. Manifestation or appearance of voidness becomes clear then and there, and then no longer remains any sufferer or suffering or anything dreadful, etc. Thus the question of practice is over suddenly because of the realization of the truth of voidness or sanatta. To sum up, while noting the manifestation of feeling, one must see it as impermanent to the extent that there is manifestation of dissolution, as unsatisfactory to the extent that there is manifestation of fear, and as no self to the extent that there is manifestation of voidness. See, with regard to the cessation of feeling, the principle is, with the cessation of ignorance there is the cessation of feeling. With the cessation of craving there is the cessation of feeling. With the cessation of kama there is the cessation of feeling. With the cessation of sense impressions there is the cessation of feeling. The explanation of all this follows the pattern of item A, but in reverse order. However, one can consider both the items together, throwing light on them from another angle. Ignorance being the general basis, it is through its arising or cessation that the other three, craving, etc., arise or cease respectively. If ignorance is still present, craving, kama, and sense impression or contact must be present as well, because it is through ignorance that different things are given value and are liked and clung to, and, as a result, craving arises. Kama becomes effective and sense impression comes into operation. If there is no ignorance, the trio and all other things are rendered meaningless and powerless. If there is ignorance, then the opposite happens. To illustrate, if the mind is not dominated by ignorance, even though there is contact between the eye and form, or ear and sound, etc., the contact or sense impression, phassa, will be meaningless.
Such being the case, the kind of feeling which is responsible for suffering cannot arise. In this way, we can say that it is because of the cessation of ignorance that there is the cessation of sense impression, and feeling also ceases to be. Craving does not arise and infiltrate, is not involved, feeling ceases because they, ignorance, etc., cease, i.e. they do not come in and get involved in conditioning it. When the meditator sees directly the different characteristics of feeling, together with its conditions of arising and ceasing, to him the feeling is manifest in all its respects. How feeling arises is clear to him, how it comes to be is manifest, how it ceases to be is manifest. In each case it is manifest clearly. When the feeling is thus manifest to the meditator, he is said to be one contemplating the feeling of rapture. All the time he breathes in and out with mindfulness while contemplating or watching feeling closely. In this way, various dhammas are brought together, samadhana, and become manifest, and consequently the meditator thrives continually in contemplation until he gains power to get rid of defilements, which have ignorance as their root, by gradually withering them away. This is the contemplation of feeling, vedananupasana, in the full sense of the word. 2. Noting perception. The noting or considering of perception follows the same pattern as that of feeling in all respects, except that in place of sense impression, feeling is the immediate condition of perception. Feeling is conditioned by ignorance, craving, and sense impression. Perception arises from ignorance, craving, and feeling itself. Therefore, it follows that perception ceases with the cessation of ignorance, craving, and feeling. Just take note that feeling is substituted for sense impression, all other things being the same. Contemplation of the manifestation of perception means to contemplate and closely see its characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness and no self, so much so that dissolution, fear and voidness respectively become manifest, as in the case of the appearance or manifestation of feeling. The point to be especially observed here by the meditator is to see whether he is at that time experiencing feeling as such, or feeling in its transitional stage on the way to becoming perception, or perception which is involved in feeling through being secretly and inextricably attached to it. All these things hitherto pointed out must be seen clearly as they are, so that both feeling and perception are clearly comprehended. 3. Noting thought. Lastly, the noting of thought, vitakka, is carried out in all respects in the same way as the noting of feeling and perception. The only difference is that the last condition of the tetrad of arising and cessation is perception instead of sense impression or feeling. Thus thought arises and ceases depending on the arising and ceasing of ignorance, craving, and perception. In the case of thought, perception is important because it is the direct or immediate condition of inducing thought or thought process. As we observed earlier, it is because one tends to perceive things as self-abiding entities, as me or mine, that the process of thought or thinking is set going. As to how ignorance, craving and condition the arising and ceasing of thought. This has the same significance as what was said in the case of feeling and perception, so that there is no need to restate it. Likewise, the contemplating of the momentary appearance or manifestation of thought has the same characteristic as contemplating manifestation of feeling or perception. As pointed out in the beginning, one should not forget that all three phenomena, feeling, perception, and thought, are interrelated, and that to see perception one has to examine feeling, because perception arises with feeling as its ground or in relation to feeling.
In the same way, to see thought one has to examine feeling because thought, vitakka, is something that arises in relation to feeling. From feeling or in feeling, perception bears upon feeling and is involved in and with feeling. A thought arises through or in connection with feeling. To know this interrelationship together with the distinctive characteristics of the three phenomena, as discussed above, is to contemplate feeling exhaustively and entirely. To recapitulate the whole theme, the first three conditions, vikaya, namely, ignorance, craving and are identical in the case of feeling, perception and thought, but the fourth condition differs in each case. Feeling, perception and thought have respectively sense impression, feeling and perception as their conditions. The reason for this is that sense impression gives rise to feeling, feeling to perception, and perception in its turn to thought. In this way one should observe that there are two kinds of conditions, the general ones and specific ones for each of the three phenomena. The practice is said to be accomplished if the meditator meditates or contemplates in such a way that while noting their conditions of arising and falling away he clearly sees their fearfulness and voidness. Contemplating in this way is said to be the accomplishment of practice because, at the time, the arising, manifesting and ceasing of feeling are clearly manifest in the full sense as intended in this fifth stage of anapanasati, the guideline of which is experiencing rapture. I shall breathe out, thus he trains himself. Experiencing rapture, I shall breathe in, thus he trains himself. Thus the distinctive and exhaustive method of contemplating feeling can be summarized as seeing the conditional arising, manifestation and cessation of feeling and the phenomena connected with feeling, i.e., perception and thought.